When Dennis lost his sight, I brought him back home. He liked to nibble on my ear and call himself my good boy. He also enjoyed using his hands to measure my body repeatedly in the darkness of the night, saying he wanted to figure out my appearance. Later, when he regained his sight, he turned out to be the missing heir, Mr. Smith, who already had a beloved goddess. Before he could see my face, I left behind a death certificate and vanished without a trace. After hiding for 5 years, upon hearing of his new marriage, I dared to show up again. But as soon as the plane landed, the airport was surrounded by a large group of black-clad bodyguards. Dennis held a custom-made wedding dress, with a gentle yet obsessive smile. "Fiancé, the measurements taken 5 years ago were inaccurate. Be good, now, I will measure again." Chapter 1. I was pulled to the door of the box by the agent but stood there hesitating to go in. Because Prince Dennis Smith was sitting inside. Behind the slightly ajar door, I heard someone complimenting. "CEO Dennis, I heard that you had an accident and went missing back then, even lost your sight. It must have been tough during that time." Dennis chuckled. "Not really tough, with someone taking care of me personally, it was easier than living now." "It must be your fiancé, right? That must have been a difficult time. Congratulations, lovers finally becoming a couple." "No." Dennis interrupted him, his voice faint. "She's right here." I was startled and suddenly lifted my head. But through the crack of the door, I saw Dennis pointing to this piece of land. "Buried here." "Oh, right. I was already dead. 5 years ago, my death certificate was personally signed and confirmed by Dennis." The agent beside me was also listening by the wall, whispering. "That woman is also unlucky. If she hadn't died, she would probably be soaring high like a phoenix now." I smiled. "Impossible." The agent disagreed. "Why are you so sure?" "If she could get the prince to agree to take care of her personally, she must have extraordinary means. That woman's seduction skills are definitely top-notch." I lowered my eyes, concealing the guilt in them. Sometimes I can't even tell who seduced whom during our first time with Dennis. Back then, he was blind, and his hearing became unusually sharp. I just whispered a few words in his ear, but he felt like it was a bomb going off in his head, reaching a climax. I was so innocent back then, curious. I asked him, "What is a climax, really?" As he explained, his hand reached towards my heart. But accidentally touched below the heart, even the veins in his neck stiffened. Seeing him frozen stiff, I thought he was dying, crying and rushing over to give him artificial respiration. He hugged me back, his lips covering mine. Lost in memories, a waiter pushing a cart suddenly bumped into me. I instinctively let out a sound, "Ah." The slightly ajar door of the box was also pushed open. Directly facing the door, Dennis suddenly raised his eyes and looked towards me. Chapter 2. Dennis and I locked eyes. In that moment, my blood froze, and I couldn't even turn away. But it only lasted a few seconds. Thanks to the societal beatings of these 5 years, I've perfected the art of wearing a fake smile. It's funny, even though Dennis and I shared a bed for 2 years. The number of times his hands touched my face and body exceeded even my own. But to him, I was just a ghost who died early and he hadn't even seen my face. What's the point of sleeping together when he's never even seen the person before? How could he possibly recognize me? As I expected, Dennis didn't recognize me. When our glasses clinked, his gaze was deep but cold. When it landed on me, it made my nerves tingle for no reason. Just like the first time I saw him. It was a stormy night with thunder and lightning, the night I lost my mother forever in the hospital. Crying on the way home, I stumbled in an alley. Dennis was leaning against the wall, drenched, barely breathing, looking disheveled. Under the dim streetlight, his profile was scarred, but his face was still so attractive it took my breath away. His dark eyes were bleeding, yet they conveyed coldness and ruthlessness. I was scared, I wanted to run. But then I thought of my mother. She was suffering on that hospital bed, if someone could save her. In the end, I brought Dennis back to my rundown apartment, using all my savings to treat him. Back then, I was uneducated, too poor to discern how expensive his clothes were, thinking he was homeless like me. I even thought my mother, up in heaven, pitied me and didn't want me to be lonely, so she led me to him. I thought I had a family again, someone to care for. Suddenly, the agent beside me pinched the back of my hand. "What are you thinking?" Still smiling. I snapped out of it, the smile on my lips turning stiff. The agent, seeing my reaction, suddenly said, "Lara, you're not falling for Dennis, are you? Let me tell you, he's famously uninterested in women. Those who try to seduce him end up in a terrible state. It's said his fiancée is his childhood friend, a princess from B City. Their relationship is very deep. Don't let him charm you. This kind of person isn't someone you can climb up to. You might offend him unintentionally." Offend? But when I decided to leave Dennis, I tied him to a bed that cost $100 per night. I rode him hard for 3 hours. And told him, these past 2 years were just me being lonely, hosting him was just a game. Now there's a wealthy sugar daddy interested in me, so I don't need him anymore. Dennis was furious, veins popping, hoarsely shouting, "Lara, if I catch you, I'll ride you until you cry." For this ancestor, being blind wouldn't have been as humiliating. I've already offended him thoroughly long ago. Luckily, I'm already dead. I should thank his fiancée for that. Anyway, after toasting tonight, there's no way I'll meet Dennis again. Thinking this, I casually strolled into the garden outside the hotel. When I looked up, I saw a tall figure standing there, slender fingers holding a cigarette. It was Dennis. He turned to look at me. Just as I was quickly thinking of a response, he suddenly shouted at me, "Resurrection." I was startled. Resurrection. He recognized me? Chapter 3. Fortunately, before I lost my composure and almost revealed my identity, a small dog suddenly leapt from behind and affectionately rubbed against my legs. It was the little stray dog I used to keep. Due to my decision paralysis, the name had never been confirmed. Dennis actually adopted it? And named it Resurrection. Resurrection what? Me, this fake dead person, resurrected? I shivered for no reason. If he knew I wasn't dead and played him, the consequences would be unimaginable. "Resurrection, stop it." Dennis put out his cigarette, waving at the little dog. But the dog, not having seen me for a long time, was frantically ecstatic at my feet. "It seems like my dog really likes you." Dennis's gaze fell on my face, calm yet profound. I pretended to be calm. I even thanked the dog circling at my feet, giving me an excuse for the nervousness I couldn't hide on my face. "Sorry, maybe I smell like meat, the steak juice splashed on me just now. I'll go back first, CEO Dennis." But as I took a step, Dennis suddenly spoke again. "Being a dog is actually quite happy." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Being a dog, as long as you're good, the owner will reward you. Being a good dog isn't bad." Once upon a time, when feelings were strong, Dennis would lie on top of me, biting my ear and saying, "I'm Lara's good dog." My heart jumped to my throat, my palms clenched. "Sorry, CEO Dennis, I'm human, I don't understand dogs." My straight response caused a moment of silence. I wanted to find an excuse to leave, but Dennis unexpectedly asked, "What if you had a good dog, would you abandon it?" "I wouldn't have a dog." "Why?" "Because I don't have the ability to take on that responsibility. I lost my mom, lost Dennis, and lost my little stray dog. I won't allow myself to have any weaknesses again. I still need to go toast, won't disturb CEO Dennis anymore." I turned around. But the little stray dog pounced on me again. My steps were urgent, yet afraid my heels would step on it. I stumbled forward. A pair of large hands came from behind, securely pulling me into their arms. "What's wrong? Is there something uncomfortable? Where does it hurt?" My nose hit Dennis's chest, his deep and urgent voice sounded in my ear. Just like those 2 years we spent together. He cared for me so much, making me feel like we could love each other until old age. "Dennis, why have you been in the garden for so long?" Suddenly, a sweet female voice sounded behind us. I didn't need to turn around to know whose voice it was. Emily. Dennis's childhood friend and fiancée. Chapter 4. The voice that shatters beautiful dreams always leaves a vivid memory. To me, Emily was just like that. I clearly remember the first thing Emily said as she stood in my shabby apartment in high heels. "Dennis actually slept in this dump for 2 years? He really can endure for our future." I know I'm not a weak person. But looking at the glamorous Emily, I couldn't even muster a word of rebuttal. For the first time, I shed tears of self-pity because of my poverty. But fortunately, not anymore. Because my heart is no longer barren and impoverished. I quickly pushed Dennis away and stood on my own. Emily walked over from behind, and there was a momentary tremor in her pupils when she saw my face. But it quickly returned to normal. It seems her acting skills are better than mine. She smiled and asked me, "Hello, you're the new singer signed by Ella Corporation, right?" "Yes." "Why were you hugging Dennis just now?" Emily pouted, looking at Dennis, and playfully said, "Aren't you afraid of making your almost fiancé jealous?" "Almost fiancé." Dennis raised an eyebrow and repeated the 3 words she said. But those dark eyes were locked straight onto me. There seemed to be boiling magma in the depths of his eyes. I was startled by a dog just now, thanks to CEO Dennis for helping me. "You two must be busy," I said calmly and started to leave. But Dennis took a long stride, blocking my path. He took out a wedding invitation from his suit and handed it to me. "1 month from now, my wedding. You must attend." His voice was deep, using a tone of certainty. Emily complained sweetly, "Dennis, you're really something. The wedding invitation is sealed, it can only be opened on the day. Otherwise, who will see the names of the bride and groom?" I had no interest in their banter. Politely, I took the invitation and left. On my way back to the room, I casually tore the invitation and threw it in the trash. But I didn't notice that a corner of the torn invitation revealed a name, Lara. Chapter 5. I thought that meeting Dennis again was just an accident. I didn't think much of it and focused on my career. Until my agent told me that a big director wanted me to sing the theme song for his drama. For someone at my current level of fame, this was considered a stroke of luck. When I arrived at the scene and saw Dennis, I realized it wasn't luck at all. He was the one who recommended me. My enthusiastic agent dragged me around, greeting people warmly. When we got to Dennis, he condescendingly spoke first. "Miss Jones, long time no see." The agent smiled apologetically. "Prince, her surname is Brown, her name is Lara." My heart raced. Back then, after faking my death and moving away, I changed my name and took my mother's surname. But Lara was a name my mother had chosen for me, and I couldn't bear to change it. After all, it wasn't a very special name. Dennis's gaze locked onto me, casually saying, "I must have remembered it wrong. I have an acquaintance named Lara too, but her surname is Jones." The more he spoke, the more mistakes he made. I simply remained silent, pretending to smile nervously. My agent was annoyed at my lack of cooperation and glared at me discreetly. I pretended not to notice. At noon, the staff brought lunch. Fruit salad. My portion had mangoes in it. Dennis knew about my mango allergy very well. But if I refused now, he would become more suspicious. My allergic reaction wasn't severe, at most a bit of rash, and taking a loratadine tablet would solve it. Compared to the trouble of being exposed, this was insignificant. I opened the fruit salad package, in front of Dennis, picked up a piece of mango and was about to eat it. The next moment, Dennis unexpectedly reached out and took the fork from my hand. He exerted a lot of force, as if he was angry about something. The mango fell on the table. My agent was stunned, CEO Dennis. Dennis even took away the salad in front of me. I heard him instructing his assistant as he walked away, "I'll have this, give her a hot meal with rice instead." Soon enough, the assistant brought me an 8-dish and soup meal. From the Fortune Pavilion. This place costs at least tens of thousands. My agent was dumbfounded, and asked me discreetly, "Lara, did you secretly meet with the prince behind my back? Did you win him over?" "Ella, didn't you say he's not interested in women? But the way he looks at you. It feels like he only cares about you. In this huge room, he only sees you." I tightened my grip on the chopsticks. Only cares about me? It seems that being deceived in the beginning isn't that ridiculous after all. It turns out even Ella, such a shrewd businesswoman, has been charmed. Chapter 6. At first, when I brought Dennis home, he was blind, and his injuries were severe. I was so poor that every piece of clothing I had was mended. I thought about taking him to a shelter, but Dennis seemed to sense my thoughts. As I got up to open the door, he grabbed my sleeve with his wounded hands. Don't chase me away. He looked straight in my direction, even though his eyes were blind. They were as deep as the sea, capable of drowning someone effortlessly. My heart immediately softened. I asked him where his parents and family were, but he didn't know. With his head bowed, his cheeks still bore unhealed scars, like a homeless stray dog. I thought he must have been ruthlessly abandoned, which made him forget everything. I started working 3 jobs a day to earn money to treat his injuries. Every night when I returned from work, Dennis would hold me, warming my hands and feet. Lara, you've worked hard. When my eyes are better, I will give you the most lavish life, the best environment, so you don't have to work so hard anymore, so you can enjoy a lifetime of happiness. I'm sorry, Lara, for making you so tired. Just wait a little longer for me, I will definitely make it happen. His arms were long enough to envelop me. Hearing him say that, my heart was filled with overwhelming sweetness. I didn't realize why he could speak so confidently and casually. And the guilt and restraint that flickered in his eyes. How could I blame you? I was going to work anyway. Honey, I've thought about it. When we save enough money, we'll go to City S to have your eyes checked. I heard they have the best eye hospital there. Anyway, I will make sure to heal you, so we can see the world together. If we have the chance, we'll have children. If not, that's okay, because we are each other's most beloved child. And also, in the future, I want to buy a house of my own, not too small, and it won't leak or have power outages. Whenever I rambled on like this, Dennis would just hold me tightly, kiss me on the forehead, then undress me and make love to me repeatedly. That way, my mouth could only be used to call out, unable to say anything else. Looking back now, maybe Dennis didn't want to hear my dreams. After all, those dreams of mine belonged to an ordinary person's life. And he was an ancestor who grew up in the imperial city with a golden spoon in his mouth. The lavish life in his eyes was completely different from what I saw. In this shabby rental room, we were lonely souls seeking warmth in each other's arms. But once we stepped out of this cheap room, we were 2 completely different kinds of people. Chapter 7. During the break in the recording session, Emily arrived. The princess of City B, Dennis's childhood sweetheart, attracted attention. Emily distributed afternoon tea and finally handed Dennis a chestnut cake she made herself. Why did you have the leisure to come listen to the theme song recording today? You seemed so engrossed just now. Dennis replied in a calm tone, because I have to meet someone very important. Everyone immediately started teasing and making noises. Emily blushed as well. Someone bold asked, CEO Dennis, is your wedding scheduled for next month? Dennis's tone turned solemn. Yes, I will confess to my beloved at the wedding next month. I didn't listen further and turned to the balcony to clear my head. The 8 dishes and a soup from lunch were too much, making my head dizzy with carbohydrates. After getting some fresh air, as I was about to come back down, I overheard a conversation at the side door. Dennis, do you think that girl named Lara's voice sounds like hers? Emily was speaking. Yes. But she's been dead for 5 years. Initially, you asked me to give her some money to appease her. I just gave her a little extra, and she took the money and left so decisively. It's not necessarily that she loved you a lot, she clearly loved money more. In fact, Emily misunderstood. I wasn't that smart back then to know that money was more important than men. I took the money quickly for 2 reasons. One was because I was inexperienced and felt humiliated by Emily's insults. The second was that I had actually seen her meeting Dennis half a month before she came to my door. That day, the shop owner I worked part-time for had to close early, so I went home ahead of time. And there, the man who had been blind and had amnesia was standing in the yard, holding a beautiful woman. His previously clouded eyes were clear and filled with indulgence. When he looked around, his gaze became sharp. Where was the blindness in his eyes? Blind was me. At that time, I was so weak and self-deprecating it was laughable. Seeing that scene, my heart ached, and I sat on the street corner crying for a long time. But when I got back home, I pretended like nothing happened, even afraid to ask him. I was scared to know the truth, afraid that Dennis would just leave like that, and I would be alone again. But later, Emily came over with money, showing me various intimate photos of her and Dennis, including bed photos. That's when this honest person got really angry. My mom always told me not to take a man who had been with someone else, such a man was useless. So, after riding in anger for 3 hours, I cooperated with Emily's fake death plan, took the money, and disappeared. Looking back now, the only regret I have is I should have taken more money back then. Chapter 8. A week after the photo shoot, nothing happened. I think Dennis was probably convinced by Emily and wouldn't try to find me to test the truth anymore. That night, as I packed up to leave City B, my agent Ella was browsing her social media. Oh, I heard from a friend that CEO Dennis's dog went missing. They've been searching for days and still haven't found it. The little stray dog lost? When I faked my death and left, I couldn't take the little stray dog with me. So, I entrusted it to the family selling roasted chicken at the end of the alley, thinking it would always manage to scavenge some bone scraps and meat in the shop. CEO Dennis has bought a new dog again, probably giving up on finding the old one. Ella's words made me even more anxious. It seems that Dennis, that jerk, won't look for it. I braved the rain and took a night bus to the old lower-end apartment. Sure enough, the door was open. I rushed in with my umbrella. Little stray dog, I knew you'd be here. Click. The light turned on. The little stray dog wasn't there. Instead, sitting by the old plastic table, there was a tall figure that didn't belong. He had a cigarette in his hand, and when he raised his eyes to look at me, his gaze was even more crimson than the cigarette tip. Lara, you're back. Chapter 9. It's Dennis. Seeing the little stray dog tied to his feet, I knew I was caught. But I still wanted to struggle a bit. CEO Dennis, what did I call you? Dennis stared at me without blinking. That night, Resurrection was so affectionate towards you, it never approached anyone else voluntarily. I invited you to my wedding, but you tore up the invitation and threw it in the trash. If you really didn't know me, you didn't need to do that. Attending the wedding would have been beneficial for networking. I had someone find you for a recording session, and as soon as you started singing, I knew it was you. Also, the way you hesitated when you saw the mango, but pretended to eat it to show me. You didn't eat the coriander or the shiitake mushrooms in that dish. And besides, Lara, I've touched you countless times, do you think I wouldn't recognize you? Since the disguise had fallen apart so thoroughly, I decided not to pretend anymore. Yes, I am Lara. So, CEO Dennis, what's the reason for calling me here? Riding a man and then wanting to run? Dennis strode towards me with long steps. He exuded an aura of hostility. I thought he might be so angry that he would hit me. After all, I had been quite ruthless when I rode him. My legs were sore for a month and I couldn't even squat. He probably wasn't an exception. But when Dennis reached me, he extended his hand and placed it on my face. His icy fingertips lightly caressed my skin. So, you look exactly like I imagined you would all these years. I've sketched your face in my mind thousands and thousands of times. Very beautiful. He stared at me intently. You're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. I didn't flinch, calmly saying, Young master, is this amusing to you? Dennis paused his hand. Lara. He called me softly. You see, you've returned to the peak, power and wealth in the palm of your hand. Now you're reminiscing about those games of love in the slums from before? Do you really want to play? Well, you pay me, and I'll play with you. I gazed back at him. Perhaps my serious expression angered Dennis. He stared at me fiercely, gritting his teeth. You only care about money. For money, you'd give up your name and family, wouldn't you? Yes, more than that. I took $3 million back then, and I faked my death and ran away. Now thinking back, I was so foolish then. You are the heir of the top-tier Smith family. I saved your life. It's not excessive to ask for $30 million. Dennis suddenly lifted me up, bent down to silence me with his mouth. One hand pulled off my tie and bound my hands. His lips gradually moved down to my collarbone. I couldn't escape, so I didn't bother to hide. Want to sleep? Come, what am I afraid of, anyway? I even slept with you when you were blind. Now that you're the high and mighty heir, wouldn't I benefit from sleeping with you? I angered Dennis. He leaned down, wanting to press me onto that $100 bed. Then he thought of something, and carried me out. Chapter 10. I was taken to a villa by Dennis. He carried me down from the car, and as we entered the villa, he squatted down to change me into warm cotton slippers. The next moment, he stood up and kissed me forcefully. Taking advantage of the moment when he was kissing my neck, I deliberately provoked him. Why not in the lower-end housing? CEO Dennis, do you think that place is dirty and no longer worthy of you? Dennis's lips paused for a moment. You have sinusitis, the bedding there hasn't been changed for a long time, very dusty. I was stunned for a moment. But I quickly returned to normal. I was no longer the little girl who would be moved to tears by a little warmth. Because when the heart is no longer barren, you will find that you can give yourself that warmth. Thinking about it, I sneezed. My nose ran uncontrollably, getting onto Dennis's hand. But he didn't seem to mind at all, immediately getting up to grab a tissue to wipe it for me. He took nasal spray from the refrigerator and brewed a cup of hot jujube flower tea for me. With such thoughtful preparations, it seems like a woman lives here. I smirked. CEO Dennis is so caring. Would you also take care of Emily like this? Why should I take care of her? I have no relationship with her. Even though you're about to get married? You guys in city be sure play around a lot. I'm not going to marry her. Our so-called engagement was just something our elders casually mentioned in childhood. Even when the wedding invitations have been sent out, you're saying this? Dennis, do you have a single truthful word? Dennis looked up at me, his eyes showing a hint of nervousness. Lara, if I said I wanted to marry you. Chapter 11. Not possible. I interrupted him. Dennis, do you think that at this point, I would still marry you? Dennis's Adam's apple rolled a few times. No matter what I say, you won't believe me, will you? Yes, ever since I found out you were pretending to have amnesia to deceive me, Dennis, I no longer want to believe you. We are already strangers, you go your lordly way, I pursue my music dream, we will not have any intersection. I remained calm and spoke to him with a smile. Dennis remained silent. The arrogance and dominance he displayed when he kissed me just now suddenly disappeared. He lowered his head, and his sharp and handsome eyebrows softened. Half kneeling in front of me. Holding the tissue, I wiped my nose within his big hand, clearly defined knuckles, slightly trembling. It was that big puppy look again. I ignored it. After a while, Dennis hoarsely spoke. Lara, will you come to my wedding? No, I won't. I refused without hesitation. I hope you attend my wedding. I'll give you an exclusive contract with Echo Entertainment for 1 year. How about that, Lara? His low, hoarse voice seemed to carry a hint of pleading. I couldn't be bothered to delve into it and instantly agreed, sure. Echo Entertainment is a top record company in the entertainment industry. This once-in-a-century opportunity, as a newcomer without any background, I couldn't even fight for it no matter how hard I tried. He's giving it to me for free, why not take it? Then it's settled. Lara, you must come. Chapter 12. Dennis drove me back to the apartment. Before leaving, he emphasized that I must attend the wedding. I couldn't understand what strange quirk this young master had, wanting his ex-girlfriend present at the wedding. Couldn't figure it out, didn't bother to try. When I got back to the apartment, I found someone standing at the door whom I didn't want to see. Emily. She looked at me coldly. Miss Jones, I didn't expect you to dare to come back. Do you think if you seduce Dennis into recognizing you, I won't be able to do anything to you? Actually, from Dennis's behavior tonight, I probably guessed the full story. Emily deceived him. So Dennis believed that I heartlessly left him for a little more money. But since we don't trust each other, we can't blame anyone. I smiled and said, Emily, are you trying to suppress me? You probably don't know, but I recorded all our conversations back then. I pretended. Back then, I was so naive, I didn't have so many schemes. But Emily was clearly intimidated by me. Clearly, Dennis was her weakness. This girl is even more love-struck than I used to be. But my experiences over the years have taught me that the more you yield, the more the other person will take advantage. Emily was speechless after my retort. Before leaving, feeling like she had lost, she couldn't help but turn back and say, Dennis and I are getting married at the beginning of next month. I know. I waved at her. He was still a virgin when he lived with me. I've trained him well, he's top-notch. Enjoy your wedding night. I slammed the door shut. Relieved. When Emily came to find me, humiliate me, that incident had already passed in my heart. But she kicked the table, causing my mother's photo frame to fall and break. That debt has finally been repaid. Chapter 13. After signing with Echo Entertainment, I suddenly became busy. If it weren't for my manager's reminder, I almost forgot about Dennis's wedding. On the day of the wedding, I attended as promised. But I didn't expect to become the center of attention. The wedding invitations were to be torn open on the spot that day, serving as entrance credentials. However, the groom's name written on it was Dennis, but the bride's name was Laura. All the guests were extremely shocked. Emily's makeup was ruined from crying, but it was too late to do anything. This incident quickly trended, reaching the top 5. Hashtag Dennis, Laura hash. Hashtag who is Dennis's bride really hash. Hashtag Emily, the fake bride hash. Hashtag Laura's fake death CEO story comes to life hash. Dennis, dressed in his groom's attire, took to the stage and recounted the events in front of all the media. He said it was all his fault for not telling me his identity because of the Smith family's unrest, wanting to protect me. He said he never promised Emily anything, the wedding was all his doing, and he never disclosed who the bride was from start to finish. He also mentioned he understood Emily's temperament, knew she had found someone to frame me as a third party, and once I got angry, I would be smeared with dirt for a lifetime. Even if it was clarified later, the damage would remain. That's why he wanted to nip this conspiracy in the bud. Finally, Dennis walked up to me, who had been stunned the entire time. He knelt on one knee, held up a ring, and proposed to me. Of course, I rejected him. Chapter 14. After rejecting Dennis's proposal, I was furious. In an instant, I became the goddess of the entire internet. Turns out there are good men among the ones you pick up. Unbelievable. Finally, not picking up a scumbag. I can accept the Smith family's prince. Still a scumbag, deception is scum. Humph, Laura Beauty, make sure to give him a good beating, beat him to death. I didn't have time to beat up Dennis. Taking advantage of this unprecedented popularity, I released my new album. I had been working on this album for 3 years, and the response was great. I topped the charts on various music platforms. My career skyrocketed, winning awards within a year, becoming popular everywhere. I gained a lot of fans. The biggest fan among them was Dennis. After the failed proposal, he started pursuing me. Even the prince pursued someone fervently. When I went to receive awards, he arranged a convoy of luxury cars for me. Wherever I attended events, he would show up on time. For products I endorsed, he would buy them and give them away for free to my fans. On my birthday, he bought the entire building's light wall in B City to celebrate for me. Hashtag has the prince successfully won his wife today? Hash became a trending topic on Weibo, with people checking in every day. I've made myself clear enough, but Dennis continued his efforts, and I no longer responded. I worked hard on my career. I didn't dare to stop for a moment, afraid that if I did, I wouldn't be able to move forward again. I came from a farther starting point than others, so I had to run faster than anyone else. At night, as I walked out of the hotel where the event was held, a van came straight towards me. I was wearing high heels and couldn't dodge in time. The next second, a tall, familiar figure appeared behind me. He flew forward to hug me. Dennis and I fell to the ground together. But he landed on his back, while he protected me securely in his arms, so I didn't get hurt. Chaos erupted around us. After a hospital examination, I was unharmed. Dennis injured his bones and needed bed rest. The culprit had been caught, sent by the rival company. Dennis had to stay in the hospital for a few days. My manager, Ella, subtly suggested that I should go see Dennis. I didn't respond, instead looking down at a key in my hand. Chapter 15. This key fell out of Dennis's suit when he flew towards me. It's also the key to my old family house. After my mother passed away and I couldn't afford a burial plot in B City, I brought her ashes back to our old home for burial. When I left in a hurry after faking my death, I forgot to take the key with me. How did Dennis have this key? I bought a plane ticket and immediately flew to China. Arriving at the front door of the old house, I opened it. Instead of dust, fresh air greeted me. The house was spotlessly clean. My mother's photo was hanging in the center of the mahogany table, surrounded by offerings, all fresh. I walked over and knelt on the mat. Envelopes were placed next to the incense burner. I picked up one of them, with the date written 5 years ago. It was when Dennis had just regained consciousness but kept it a secret from me. My dearest wife Laura. By the time you receive this letter, I will have left our home, but only temporarily. Rest assured, we have paid respects to our ancestors in front of your mother's spirit, and we have also consummated our marriage. You, Laura, are the only wife of my life, and that will never change. Firstly, let me reintroduce myself to my wife with sincerity. I am Dennis, the eldest son of the wealthiest family in B City, the heir of the Smith family's conglomerate. I deceived you when we first met out of necessity. My love, please read this letter carefully and give your husband a chance to explain. When you met me in the alley back then, the truth is. Before I left the old house in the village, Grandma Myler from next door called out to me. Is that Laura? Hello, Grandma, it's been a long time. How are you feeling? I'm doing great. Why are you alone? Didn't your husband come with you? Have you had any children? A boy or a girl? Husband. I'm not married. No, you're lying, sweetie. Your husband comes every year to pay respects at your mother's grave. Not just on the 3 main festivals, but on all the big and small holidays. He always brings a lot of things and shares them with us neighbors, saying we must have looked after you when you were young. I was stunned. Dennis comes every year to pay respects at my mother's grave? Laura, you found yourself a good husband. He looks handsome and seems wealthy, but he's not too proud. He can even live in this old house of yours. Last New Year, I saw him here and even went to give him some roasted sweet potatoes. I heard him crying alone in the room, calling out your name, saying how much he misses you and asking when you'll come back. Oh, and the year before, someone in the village told him that you had passed away. He was furious, kicked over the old fence at the village entrance, saying you couldn't possibly be gone, that he wouldn't believe it, that he would wait until you returned. He's a lucky guy, this young man, really longing for your return. See, noticed anything? All the fences at the village entrance are brand new now, costing several tens of thousands. Your husband had them installed. After installing them, he even gave each household rice, flour, oil, and meat, saying if you ever came back, never tell you about him kicking down the fence. Oh dear, I've said too much. I was speechless. Well, it's a foolish person with lots of money. Case closed. Chapter 16. I flew back to B City overnight, carrying all the letters. When I arrived at the hospital room, Dennis was having porridge. Clearly, he didn't expect me to come find him. When he saw me, he suddenly sat up from the bed, knocking over the bowl. The porridge spilled on him, but he didn't care and walked towards me. His eyes locked onto me, accidentally bumping his leg on the chair. His secretary, speaking softly behind him, said, "CEO Dennis, take it easy. Laura came on her own, surely she won't run away." My gaze shifted to his injured arm, and I immediately warned, "Your hand isn't healed yet, don't move recklessly." I helped him sit down. He stared at me up close, his eyes almost overflowing with surprise. The secretary tried to say something, but Dennis quietly kicked him and he awkwardly left the room. "Why are your hands so cold?" Dennis frowned. "I had someone send hot soup. You weren't in the room the past few days, where did it go?" This was a subtle way of inquiring about my whereabouts. I smiled, saying, "Since you've planted so many spies around me, do you still need to ask me?" Dennis pursed his lips and remained silent. Then came the big dog-like expression. "Laura." I went back to my hometown. I took out the letters. I only read a few lines of the letters, for the rest, I want to hear it from your own mouth. I ask, you answer. All right. He replied promptly, "I'll tell you anything you ask, including my bank card passwords. I have over 100 cards, and all the passwords are your birthday." I was speechless. Chapter 17. From Dennis's response, I finally pieced together the entire truth of that year. When I found Dennis in the alley, he had just experienced a serious car accident. The one behind it was his father's illegitimate child, his brother. His brother bought a hitman from Hong City with the aim of killing him. The week before I brought Dennis back home, he indeed had a confused memory, sometimes clear-headed, sometimes confused. So when I asked his parents and family, he couldn't say anything. After staying in my home for about half a month, Dennis finally fully recovered. But he didn't immediately tell me his identity. He didn't want me to be implicated. At that time, the infighting within the Smith group was so intense that even someone like me, who often heard gossip around the corner, was aware of it. When Grandpa Smith passed away, the inheritance rights were given to his most beloved legitimate eldest son, which caused dissatisfaction among the other illegitimate children. Dennis's father openly brought a mistress back to the ancestral home, sidelining Dennis's mother, and Dennis disappeared. He feared that those illegitimate brothers would seek revenge, which would affect me. He bided his time, endured silently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. After living in my home for 5 years, he finally found an opportunity. For these 5 years, many times I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid you'd be as scared as I was. I was also afraid you'd think my identity was too dangerous and reject me. In fact, starting from the 3rd year, my trusted assistant had already found me, but I had him secretly protect us, not wanting to alert the enemy. If those brothers of mine found me, the consequences would be unimaginable. I pursed my lips. After thinking for a moment, I couldn't help but ask him, "Then, what was going on when you were holding Emily outside my house?" Dennis suddenly frowned, then fully realized. "So, you saw that scene and misunderstood." That day, one of my brothers came over, and Emily and I staged a play together. I suddenly remembered, when he was holding Emily, his eyes were scanning the surroundings. Turns out, he wasn't afraid of me suddenly appearing. There were enemies lurking in the shadows, and he was tense. At that time, the company needed me to preside over a meeting to turn the tide, so I left in a hurry and didn't dare to come back to find you. I wrote these letters, planning to send them to you once I returned to the company, so you would know the whole truth. I had Emily give you some money, acting out a scene where I didn't want you anymore, to make sure you wouldn't be targeted by my brothers. They would think you were an insignificant abandoned person. I just didn't expect that Emily would go behind my back and give you more money to leave, even sending our bed photos. I also didn't expect that you took the money and truly left. Before leaving, you said you found a new financial backer. Do you know how angry I was? Every time I got angry, I would think, I hope your new financial backer is not as wealthy as I am, so when you turn back, you will still come back to me. Dennis's gaze locked deeply onto me. His tone carried a hint of choking emotion and self-blame. I'm not saying all this to shift all the blame to Emily. Lara, I know I was wrong. I should have explained everything to you earlier. I understand now that love is about facing everything together, not assuming what's best for you. Lara, I'm sorry, I love you. Could you give me another chance? Chapter 18. I did not answer Dennis's final question. After all the misunderstandings from that year were cleared up, I felt that we were both at fault. I was wrong for being too cowardly, not having the courage to ask clearly. He was wrong for being too arrogant, not understanding the meaning of loving someone. To love each other should mean sharing everything, big or small, together. The 5 years we spent apart, we can't blame anyone but ourselves for not understanding how to love each other. A month later, Dennis was discharged from the hospital. I also announced on Weibo that I had found a man I liked, waiting for an opportunity to confess to him. Dennis didn't ask me who he was. He just sent me a message, "If he treats you badly, tell me, I'll beat him." I called him back and said, "I have some gossip for you. When you caused that tacky video scene at the wedding that year, Emily's reputation was completely ruined, and she left the country in the 2nd month. I know. All business between my family and Emily's family has been cut off, and there will be no further dealings in the future. As for Emily, if you want her to pay more. I laughed. No, she seems to be fine with it. She even texted me yesterday, apologizing, saying she got married abroad and had twin sons, asking me when I would accept you. And how did you respond? I posted on Weibo, didn't I? I like someone else now. Oh. What about you? Have you met any new girls recently? I've been busy lately. Dennis changed the subject. Are you on set? Have you had breakfast? Ella must have prepared it for you. You prepared it, didn't you? He fell silent. I pictured his big, puppy-like face, no, his incorrigible naughty dog-like face. Domineering, forceful, yet cautiously attentive. I never let him prepare these things for me. Every time he would bow his head in apology. Then, he would insist on preparing again when I turned away. When I asked him, he would act all pitiful. How can there be such a dog-like man? Oh, Dennis, your mother contacted me a few days ago. She contacted you? What did she say? Don't worry, I'll talk to her. She said you're not young anymore and should get married, asked if I had any thoughts. Well, what did you? I have a man I like. I'll confess to him publicly at the concert next month. You'll come to that, right, Dennis? Oh. I'll be busy next month, going on a business trip abroad, so I might not be able to make it. Dennis's voice suddenly became low. Even his breathing seemed to stop. I had a feeling that the next moment he might throw himself into the river in frustration. I suppressed a smile and said, "Oh, is that so? Well, if the lead doesn't show up, I won't be able to confess. I'll just have to find someone else to like." There was a loud bang on the other end of the phone. It must have been Dennis dropping his phone. Excited. His secretary's voice quickly followed, "President Dennis, don't run. Your car is right there, I'll drive. I know where Laura's event is. You can't drive with your hand." In the 3rd year after Dennis and I got married, we had a daughter. When our daughter turned 5, we took her back to our hometown. We lived in the old house made of mud, then took her to bow to my mother. In the crisp and tender voice of our daughter echoing through the mountains and forests. "Grandma, I'm Alice, I came to see you with Mom and Dad. Dad said he will take good care of Mom, so you can rest assured. Grandma, Mom said you used to sing very beautifully. I'm learning to sing now. Let me sing for you." Leaning against Dennis's chest, I looked at our daughter, who bore some resemblance to my mother. A sense of happiness and peace filled my eyes. When our daughter got tired of singing, Dennis carried her on his back, and we strolled leisurely together. The sun rose from the horizon. "Husband," I called out to him. Dennis turned to look at me, his deep eyes still gentle and affectionate. "Do you know, husband?" I tiptoed and whispered mysteriously in his ear, "I love you, from the moment I met you." A light shone in Dennis's eyes. Hotter than the rising dawn. He lowered his head, his lips pressing against mine, and he said each word with utmost solemnity. "Wife, I love you too. Dennis loves Laura, unwaveringly, for eternity."